Hello and welcome back to Noise Podcast. Today we've got someone who I've had brief conversations with over the past few years, Frank Bach, although he did have a previous different surname, so we'll get into that during the podcast. He's currently a designer at Headspace, and I believe Wu has also had some interactions with Headspace in the past. How are you two guys doing?
Doing great, doing great.
Is it another lovely sunny day in California?
You know what? It looks like it's peeking out a little bit, the sun, but it's been some rainy weather lately, so it's not typical California.
Well, that is typical London, so welcome to the real world, my friends.
I didn't realize it was still raining. I thought it was sunny out. I looked out kind of my shades and it kind of looked sunny. But yeah, I'm like an hour away from you, so obviously not that big of a difference in
Makes all the difference.
weather.
Right, let's dive into it. Well, firstly, thank you, Frank, for coming on.
No problem. My
For
pleasure.
me, it's been a long time coming to finally put a voice to the emails that we've had back and forth over the past couple of years. But firstly, I think me and Wu in particular, would both like to know if you were sort of in an elevator pitch situation and someone said to you, "Hey, what's your living? What do you do?" How would you approach that question?
What do I do? So I'll give you what I tell the Lyft drivers, that I design apps, and then that usually, like any product designer knows, that usually goes into them asking you if you can help design their app. So that's no, but just to be jokes aside, I would just say that I'm a designer of a meditation app called Headspace. I you know I identify as a skateboarder, punk rocker, Canadian, all of these things. Yeah.
So
I really struggle with this actually. I pretty much have a consistently A, B, C, D test of how I answer that question. I'm currently going through just saying I'm product designer, and then people say,
Yeah.
"Oh, what, like tables and sofas and stuff?" I'm like, "No, digital one." And then they say, "What does that mean?" And I say, "Okay,
It's
well, I design an app."
it's a great question about, what's your pitch, and I guess it all depends on who you're speaking to and what you're trying to communicate to them, and it kind of poses these big questions of identity. Is that what you lead with, is product design? And then I struggle with it too, for sure.
What do you do, Wu?
so I right now do user interface design for a video game company, and then at night I kind of do like creative direction stuff and just general art stuff on the side as freelance. But Frank, I got a cool question for you. So let's say you
Sure.
had like a college student that's trying to like figure out their life. They're like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I want to maybe become a product designer or maybe
Yeah.
something along those lines. Like, how would you explain like your day to day stuff? Like, what do you do when you first get there? Like, obviously like the stuff that you can't talk about. Like, what are the general things that you kind of go through throughout a day? Is it like more information side? Is it like organizing people? Is it organizing screens? Is it trying to sell the business model? Like, what exactly is it that you kind of go into? Maybe like a little more in depth than an elevator pitch, but more for like somebody that's trying to like just figure out their life.
Sure. So, do you mean kind of like as advice for them, or just to give them the pitch on what I do?
Just to basically like, let's say they're trying to figure out if that's the thing for them. Like let's say they
Okay.
love organizing people, they love figuring out like the business side of a company. Like, would that like fit them? Is that something that would make sense to them? Like, just imagine they don't really know much about it and they're trying to
Sure.
maybe learn.
Cheryl, the way that I kind of see product design is there's two sides. There's people on both sides. Um, the team side is kind of the organization, the vision side, and kind of defining that and motivating people to do the work, and for yourself to do the work as well. And then there's the other side, which is the users side, which in a subscription based business like Headspace, uh, we do get interaction with them, but we kind of have to call them in. Otherwise you're just kind of looking at data and charts and that type of stuff, to try to get insights. But yeah, there's the two sides. One is team, the other is who's using the product. And if it interests you to kind of dig into people and what motivates them and how they work best and that kind of thing, then I think it's a pleasant line of work.
I would like to catch you just there because you haven't actually said the word design just then, and that is
Sure.
very important, but also something that not many people actually even think about. So a lot of people would answer that question by saying, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I open a couple of tools and I push some pixels around, and then I do
Yeah.
the user stuff."
Yeah, I tried to take a step back. I actually spent a lot of time designing. I design like more than half the day probably. Usually working on features or um, like growth initiatives. I've kind of gone back and forth between designing for the app itself and also designing for growth related things. I.e. like growth mechanisms, referral mechanisms, landing pages, all that kind of good stuff. I went really deep on designing for products and features for a little while, and not to say that I got bored of it, but I felt like I kind of maximized my learning and contribution in that way. And this opportunity came up to do a little bit of growth design, and some designers would say, "Oh man, that sounds terrible. That's like too close to like monetization and finance and all that stuff." But I mean, everybody loves to get their paycheck every 2 weeks. So I figure, if not me, then who? So I think I took that responsibility on to work on growth stuff, and it's been an awesome process. And I've kind of thought that um, as a meditation app, mindfulness app, some of these kind of revenue growth techniques that could be implemented in a product, it could be cash flow positive, but really terrible for users. So I
Mhm.
thought, let's take that responsibility on and take on the project that's a little bit less exciting from like a feature perspective.
So this is something that I think is really interesting about the company that you work for, which I think is rare for a
Yeah.
lot of startups because a lot of them are looking at that burn down chart, right? And they're like, we need to make money no matter, like what that method is. They'll kind of like cut corners, they'll do things that aren't like fully like, I don't know, like moral, I guess. And I've
Yeah.
had some friends that have worked at these companies, and they tell me some of the stories
Yeah.
where they literally use dark patterns on purpose.
Yeah.
Which, if you guys
Yeah.
don't know what dark patterns is basically for all the people listening. They're like patterns that kind of trick users into doing something that they don't necessarily want to do, or that might lead them in a direction where it's going to kind of make them make a purchase when they might not want to make a purchase or do other things too. And I appreciate that about companies that don't take those risks too. They're just like, we're going to give you value because in the long run, to me, I think that strategy works better. But I do really appreciate when people do say things like that, that they really are like, and you can tell by when you use the app that you guys are like very focused on, the actual user and not just making money off of people too. I think that's super interesting. There's a bunch of free versions of things, and like people can just use it, and like they don't have to necessarily always pay for it. So that's, I'm sure it's much broader than that. I'm oversimplifying it, but I think that's always great.
Yeah,
Sure.
there is
Yeah.
the harsh reality that businesses need to make money, and
Absolutely.
you get to you get to a point where some businesses are struggling and they need to force the payments. They need to get more people on, however which way they can, because they've got people who they need to pay, they've got taxes to pay or whatever, and that's
Hmm.
where things can very easily swing in the wrong direction. But then it's up to the strong minds in the business to say, you know what, we can actually do it in a much more effective and ethical way. It's obviously a lot difficult, more harder to prove that because you need time.
For
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah, and I think it goes all the way up to finance. It's not only a product design decision. I think as a company, um, Headspace, operates in that sense, in that kind of transparent way. Um, our co-founders, Rich and Andy, Andy is the voice in the app, and he was a trained monk. And, some days I see Andy around the office and I wonder, uh, you know, does he even want to be in business? Like, this was definitely not his vision of his future, but he's happy to be in the position he's in. But also as a company, Headspace is really lucky uh, to be valued, pretty highly. I think it was 300 million or something like that. The last kind of press that I saw, and a few months back we hit 1 million paying subscribers. So there is some good good momentum going in that way. And yeah, I think it's a good time to kind of set that standard and define those principles on what we're willing to do, what we're not willing to do. And as a company, it's definitely always been very much brand driven. And one of the co-founders, Rich, comes from advertising, so he definitely sees the value in those kind of long-term brand plays.
Yeah, that's got to be an interesting dynamic between those two guys. You have this like business guy, and then you have a monk, which I think is like
Yeah,
incredible because
yeah,
I've watched a lot of his
yeah,
videos and stuff. And this guy is like
yeah.
so zen. Like somebody could like walk in and like be yelling at this dude and like cursing him in the face, and he'd just be like, "Cool, man." Like you could just tell he would have a
It's
level head, which not a lot of people would have. But I think that's also interesting because that
yeah,
trickles down too to the employees. I think too because I actually got to see your guys' office, and you can see all the people there too. They're very like the reflections of the leader too, right? You know, nothing's
yeah.
perfect. There's always going to be like
No,
little things, whatever, at every company. But I think for the most part, like people that run the company, they tend to reflect down, and then people kind of follow, what their footsteps are too. So if you're a decent human being and you're looking, your end goal is happiness for your users, and that's truly your focus, I think that money is going to come anyway, in my opinion. And every time I've taken people apart and tried to figure out like why they were successful, that tends to be like the core thing. And like one of the pillars is like to legitimately care about that end user, which a lot of people say, but not a lot of people actually do.
yeah, Wu, I think you nailed it with if we're going to be a company that's based on kind of health and happiness, then we need, internally, we need to be the kind of the most perfect reflection of that. If we're not living it day to day, then how can we pass that on to the users we're designing for?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that you've got the two co-founders, very different backgrounds
Yeah.
themselves. But you also got quite a different background in that, didn't you run your own studio before, and then you sort of made the jump down to San Francisco to join Headspace?
Yeah, so I started my own studio straight out of college, up north in Sudbury, Ontario, a little small mining town in
Fun fact
Canada.
about Sudbury
Yeah,
is that my brother's fiance is from Sudbury as well.
that is so surprising. It's yeah, no, that I don't think this has ever happened before. Usually I've got to point it out on a map for people. Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know where Sudbury is, it's about a 4-hour drive straight north from Toronto. So if you know where that
Oh
is,
yeah.
um, picture a whole lot of nature and trees and lakes, and then you eventually get to the nickel mining capital of the world.
Yes.
So yeah, I ran a studio there for about 7 years, straight out of college. We started it when it was kind of the middle of the recession, and thankfully Canada wasn't hit quite as hard as the U.S. was, but there was still a bit of a ripple effect there. So not a lot of kind of jobs coming out of coming out of my studies. So just thought, let's go for it. Let's start a little studio, and eventually grew it to about 8 or 10 people, and had
Oh,
some
wow.
really exciting projects for companies and lots of nonprofits as well. Uh, Big science centers, art galleries, record labels, that kind of stuff.
Right. So with that studio going very well, uh, you decided to cull it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that was kind of a major life milestone moment for me. Uh, Running a studio, anyone who's done this or who's kind of freelancing and that kind of thing, that can be super stressful. You've got kind of nobody to look to when things go wrong, or even when things go right, you're kind of just celebrating by yourself. Uh, so it can be a little bit lonely. And through that, kind of going through that, I discovered meditation, and that it was actually through Headspace. It was my wife, or who's now my wife, who was then my fiance. She was trying to kind of get me onto this, and I was super skeptical. I'm like, yeah, that sounds ridiculous. There's no way I'm sitting and meditating. Like, no way, no chance. Uh, I was very much like a kind of high strung, um, almost like I want to say a Gary V character, but not quite a Gary V character. But you're kind of you're in that mode of like selling and pitching and trying to get new business, and it's it becomes a bit of a hamster wheel. And yeah, through meditation, kind of sitting down with thoughts and sitting down with your mind, not something I hadn't really ever done since I was maybe like a little kid. And yeah, I realized this was kind of not the career path I wanted to take. I didn't want to run a studio. I wanted to do true design, like, hands-on design. And I was working a lot more in kind of brand and marketing at that time. And I think I saw this desire to, work on something that was maybe a more of a digital product, a little more like future facing, future forward. And that was the first step of kind of this new path that I've been on.
Yeah, I think that gets as far future forward as you can get. A monk that runs an app company. I'm not sure that I've ever heard that sentence out of anybody else's mouth.
Is that a
It
sci-fi
wasn't,
film?
yeah, it wasn't the first move. The first, I mean, moving to a new country, even though it's still kind of North America,
Yeah.
it can be, it's a pretty big move. And I mean, many Europeans, I'm sure, feel this because there's a lot of movement between countries there. But uh, yeah, as a Canadian moving to the U.S., even though we still get their media, we still get you know all of those kind of cultural ties. It's still kind of a shocking experience to enter this totally new country that you're foreign to. And uh, originally moved to Los Angeles to work for a company called Eden Speakerman, and we worked on Red Bull TV, and that was an awesome, awesome learning experience. Worked on a multi-platform media app, and I always had kind of this sight for Headspace, this kind of vision that I'd really like to be there. Not quite sure in which capacity, but I knew that they'd done something really magical for me. So I really would have loved to contribute. And then, kind of 10 months later, the opportunity came up, and yeah, here I am.
Yes. So Sudbury as a town is obviously very different to where you are at the moment. Is that different lifestyle, atmosphere, nature, situation something that you find missing?
There are aspects that I miss, but overall, I think my worst day in LA is better than my best day in Sudbury. I was I was not in a good place in that kind of isolation. And of course, you always love your hometown. And on a different day, I might have answered that question a bit nicer. Uh,
Yeah.
but I figure let's be real. Yeah, I love Sudbury. I love visiting. I grew up playing hockey and doing outdoor winter sports. But I also grew up skateboarding and listening to punk rock and hip hop and just wanting to feel that culture, and always kind of felt a little bit alien in a city that values, like, outdoors and snow machining and ATVing and all of these kind of motorsports. uh, so arriving in LA and just seeing that sun shining down, and the skate culture, and the arts communities, it just really felt like I'd kind of come home, honestly.
Yeah, and the area in LA that you live in is like super vibrant and like very full of like, or at least I'm assuming you live by the office or generally in the same area, right?
Yeah, I live in Playa Vista.
Okay, yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's kind of near Culver City and
sure.
Marina. But yeah, still a short drive to Santa Monica. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole area is just like so alive, full of art. Like that was my first impression because I used to live in Venice. I just moved to
Okay.
Irvine recently, but that whole area, I remember walking outside and I was just like immediately inspired. And I kind of have the same story as you. I came from Michigan where it was like super
Yeah.
cold, like there's almost
Yeah.
never any sun. And then I came out here and it was just like sun rays hitting your face, like almost 365 days, out of the year. And it's a total huge, huge
Yeah.
change. But one thing that you had mentioned earlier that you kind of glossed over that I think that it would benefit people to know that transition and how it happened was when you started using the meditation. You said that you were kind of one person and you flipped over to the other, because I've been using meditation a lot too, and I've noticed a lot of changes in like my behavior and the way that I see my day and the way that I guess like like what I used to think were like catastrophes. Now I'm just kind of like whatever, like I'll figure it out. But I'm curious what your transition was like. Like how did that happen? Like what was that like? Like what specifically were you doing while that happened?
Yeah, I think that one big question I asked myself was what's the best day that I've had, this past month, and how can I have more of those days? And I don't think I would have realized like what a good day felt like unless I'd taken a moment and thought about it, or I mean, some people we go back and forth around like, should you think or should you not think in meditation? And I'm kind of a believer of just like, if the thoughts are coming, um, and they're not bad ones, then maybe just kind of identify them, acknowledge them, and then kind of let them move on. Um, so yeah, I think the life was a little bit, I don't know, maybe just a bit more chaotic at the time, and I knew I needed I needed to calm something down, or else I was going to either get like really sick health wise or something, whether that was like mental health, or if you're not sleeping very well, or you're not you're not eating very well, who knows, like you really could be down the road to having a heart attack or something. So
Absolutely.
those were all kind of factors.
Do
Yeah.
you think that that is synonymous with our industry, or synonymous with our generation, or synonymous with city life, or all of the above and everybody?
Yeah, I think so. I think our generation now, especially with kind of having access to everything through social and the internet, and just being able to see like the lives many people are living, kind of freaks you out a little bit and makes you think, oh wow, like I need to catch up, or I need to do better, do bigger. How could I ever afford a $3 million condo in New York City if if I don't get working all day and night? uh, I think it's improving. I think mental health is becoming much more a much more common topic to speak of, and I think we're in the part of the pendulum where we've gone really far in the other direction, where we're talking about it a lot, and I think it's going to kind of settle somewhere in the middle, and it will just
Mm.
be as normal as tying your shoes.
Hopefully.
I hope so. Yeah.
With that in mind, it's probably a good point for us to wrap up that first section, dive into something a little bit more different. It'd be
Hmm.
great to hear both of your opinions, actually, just on how personal brand manifests itself in the industry, what actually defines that, who we are, what makes us successful individually rather than as an employee. And up to you, Frank. Firstly, is congratulations on getting married.
Oh,
I
thanks very much. Thank you.
I was I was searching for you a few weeks ago just in prep for the podcast, and I was like, "Where's he gone? Where's his guy? I can't find him by his name." And I realized you've done a sort of an extensive personal rebrand, new website,
Hmm.
new social handles. How was that experience for you, letting go of your previous persona, I guess?
Well, it kind of all comes back to meditation. Are you willing to let go of these kind of these things you hold on to for so long? And yeah, I did recently get married. We got married on New Year's Eve in Palm Springs. It was a wonderful little elopement ceremony. It was just us and a photographer and an officiant. And my wife Terry and we've been together for about 9 years now, and we talked about this for so long. We've kind of started and then stopped planning a wedding a few times, and then
Mm,
eventually we kind of just sat down and thought, who are we doing this for? Why are we doing it? What are the reasons that we keep kind of stalling this? And none of it had to do with love. It all had to do with the factors surrounding who's invited, where's it going to be. It was all this like logistical stuff, and then we just faced the faced it and just thought, it's for us, it's for love, it's a kind of a celebration and commitment that we want to have together, and so let's just do it for us. And another question that came up, it's come up many times, was will she take my last name, will I take her last name, like what are we doing about this? Like this was something we needed to kind of be firm on. And yeah, we just kind of kept hitting that wall, and eventually came up with this idea. And I've heard of a couple people doing this before, which is doing a merger of both your family names. And at first I was a little bit hesitant, but I also felt weird about her taking my last name. And I think this is totally up to the individual, up to the couple, up to the
yeah.
relationship. And I would not judge anybody for any choice they make. But for us, this idea of of her taking my last name and me, but not particularly loving my last name as well. It felt a little bit like historically, it's kind of like the woman becomes the man's property,
Hmm.
and and we just thought, it's 2019. I think we're living in a really cool cultural moment, and this feels um, very true to us to come up with a different solution. And so what we did is we took the first two letters of her last name, which were Barksy, and the first two letters of my last name, Chartrand, and we came up with a new last name, which is Bach, Bach. And when we landed on it, we both kind of just looked at each other and thought, this is beautiful. This is it. This will take some getting used to for sure, for myself, for family, for everybody. Um, but yeah, I'm really really happy with it, and I'm really excited to kind of continue on with this new name. And I think it's like for me to go through this and all of the emotion and the kind of baggage that comes with a name change. I feel like in a very small way I can empathize with what many women go through, often through marriage. So yeah, it felt right for us, and for sure, it's no judgment on
It's a wonderful story
yeah,
that you had to make some pretty tough decisions throughout
sure.
that entire process, and it took many years to come to those conclusions. Is that a trait that you've had to work on, what sort of that brutality of decision making, or is it something you had to realize throughout this process and you want to take going forward now?
Yeah, I'd like to take it going forward because those questions don't go away; they just sit in your mind, and I think you're better off to make a call and just move forward.
Yeah, Woo, you're a really busy guy. You've got so many projects going on. How do you manage your decision making with that in mind? Are you very cutthroat and brutal about what you have to do, or are you sort of flexible with how you manage things?
I think it depends on what it is. So if it involves my girlfriend, like obviously I, consult her, see like what she thinks and try to like, find that middle ground. If it's like about work stuff or, if I'm working for a client, it's always like a split decision. But I mean, if I'm trying to like sometimes life decisions where it's like, do I want to work here? Do I want to work here? Sometimes I literally flip a coin because I'm like, you know what? Honestly, I have no idea until I try this thing. I have no idea. And I've always hopped around in different kinds of jobs. I mean, I've been like car design, I've been in app design, I've done like weird graphic design, t-shirt design. I used to do website, like literally like I would just take whatever came my way. I was like, as long as it has to do with art, I would just do it. But I would just honestly just flip a coin sometimes. Simple as that.
Well, that's a way to tackle a problem.
For sure.
I think both of you have got a sort of a healthy social media following. Your personal brands are quite strong, whether it's split across the few accounts or it's just specifically Twitter and Instagram. Do you have an opinion on whether it's essential as a successful designer to have these followings, and could you separate them?
I think it depends on what you think success is.
Yeah.
Is success to have an audience to reach? Uh, I've always kind of liked knowledge sharing and kind of getting up on a stage and kind of speaking my mind or sharing something with a group of people. And I think that goes back to my kind of account, uh, kind of running a studio days, where I was often in front of people pitching projects and concepts. So Twitter is kind of like this small digital way of having that again. I think when you go back to kind of living in a remote place in northern Canada, Twitter is kind of the only access you have to the greater design world. So that I think that's kind of how that's happened for me. But yeah, I think it helps. It for sure helps. I don't think I would get asked to do any speaking engagements if I only had a couple hundred followers.
Yeah, in which case success for you would mean getting those engagements, but that is
Yeah,
also kind of not related to the daily practice of designing solutions to problems. It's more of a broader personality direction, isn't it?
yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I really struggle with. I think I've spoken about it before with the sort of drive and pressure on people to have influence as a professional, and seemingly if you're not influential, you're rubbish.
yeah,
Yeah, that's actually I think a conversation that really needs to be had too. I think Rick has a really good point that it really depends on what your end goal is, right? Like if your end goal is to like impact hundreds of thousands of millions of people and you want to change the whatever, like if you have that kind of goal, like yeah, then probably having, people, follow you is a good thing to have, and sometimes it's just the right people, right? Like you don't have to have like, 4 million followers. You might just need, 2,000 good ones too, I think. But I think that it depends on like what your end goal is too, right? Because some things do need that kind of following, and some people, they just want to like sit at a company and be able to influence the company on a micro level, right? And that's fine. Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think a lot of people think they do have to have that other side where it's this like massive brand. I do think that personal brand is important, in the sense that like you need to be able to sell yourself to a company to say like, hey, here's the things that I've done, here's what I stand for, here's what I believe in. And that's going to help them understand you better, because a lot of times, like in the past, I've done a lot of interviewing, and it's like kind of like a tie a lot of times. And then you go online and you kind of look at, what kind of things they're posting, how they're tied into like the design community, things like that too. And that'll kind of help you make that decision as well too. So I do think that you need like a small level of it, whereas like you're at least, putting your portfolio out there, and you're kind of like displaying it in a way that's like very intelligible that people can kind of understand and stuff too. But and then there's the other side too. So I feel like there's kind of tiers, and depending on what your end goal is, depends on like what tier maybe what you stand in. And I don't know if I
I
like.
have rejected people before because they had a questionable social media presence.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, so
Mm-hmm.
it may reflects on the company you're at, and
Absolutely.
if you're posting left field opinions freely on the internet, then you're going to affect our ability to raise money. You're going to affect our ability to get more employees, and you've got to be conscious about what you're doing. And I think that's another interesting debate, is whether you treat your social media as an extension of your practice or extension of your business, or if it's just somewhere where you talk about TV. And I think both are fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I
I mean,
struggle with
I have
mixing them
some
up.
colleagues who who's strictly post memes on Twitter and Instagram, and I really enjoy following them as well, because I think we all need a little bit of that. I think
Absolutely.
whatever you're kind of naturally leaning toward, and for me, it's turned into this, like, I don't know, I guess like trying to be inspiring to live a more mindful life, and maybe that's leaning more in the kind of design world. Yeah, that's just kind of what it's turned into for me. But it definitely didn't really take off until I joined Headspace. So I definitely credit mostly Headspace for helping me with that megaphone
It's
that
a
is
good case
Twitter.
of leverage.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's helpful just depending on your goals, like you guys have been saying. And for me, something that an old friend told me once was, as you mature in your career, people tend to hire you more for your ideas and thoughts um, and kind of your perspective, and less for your execution. And at the time, I didn't really understand, but I'm seeing it more clearly now. Uh, and so I guess Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram those are all tools to kind of share your perspective. And if that helps you, you know, attract the right employers, attract the right coworkers, attract friendships, all of this stuff. I mean, I don't think I'd be sitting here chatting with you guys if I hadn't jumped on the Twitter and started sharing my thoughts.
Yeah. In
So
fact, me and Wu actually met on a Slack group
we did.
as well.
Yep. Yep.
What Slack group was it?
United Designers.
Yes.
Okay,
It's just more American based, isn't it? But there's a few people from around the world in there.
nice.
That was actually going to be my next question. Actually, do you have a strong opinion either way on designer sort of social networking, things like Dribble, open Slack groups, those kind of things? Is that something you find yourself engaging with, or is it just something you don't have time for?
I think I'm lucky to have a big enough group of designers at Headspace at work, and to kind of get that fix. But I definitely see the need for community and sharing of ideas, different perspectives. Um, I've also got a good bunch of friends that are kind of around the world that I've worked with in the past, that we'll regroup once in a while on like WhatsApp um, or something like that, and kind of just chat design. But yeah, I think this future we're headed toward, where we've got a lot of remote workers, I think I think those Slack communities are super important.
So I got a quick question for you. One thing
Sure.
that I noticed when I used to live in Michigan was that I tend to go to like a lot more social media and like reading about, on articles and going on YouTube and learning about design that
Hmm.
way. But when I moved to
Yeah.
LA, I started being surrounded by those people that were making those videos, and all of a sudden, people like the future
Yeah.
are like literally down the street from me, where I'm like, whoa, like I
Yeah.
didn't know you guys were like literally across the street from me. This is crazy. So I'm curious
Yeah.
how you feel you've changed when you moved from Canada to here, like how that
Yeah.
affected you as a person. Because I noticed that like I wasn't interested in like podcasting and all this stuff. Like none of this stuff would be interesting unless I was around those people that were like that crazy ambitious, because it didn't even seem like a possibility. But I do also think that there's something to be said about, like the smaller towns, like people still can be
Yeah.
successful. So I'm kind of curious, since you've kind of done both, you've done
Yeah.
successful, business in a small town, and you've been in LA, like can you talk about like those differences and like how it's changed you?
Yeah, I think living in a small town kind of feels like you're living in a fishbowl where kind of everyone is feels like everyone's looking at you, or um, you get to know people very personally, like the folks at the grocery store, or you run into your old teacher at the market or whatever. Like all that stuff is really nice, and it builds a really strong kind of community. But um, and on the other hand, getting to LA, which is kind of a place where people are in and out very quickly, they kind of come here for the kind of the big dream, whether they're an actor or a startup founder or whatever. And if it's successful, then they stick around. But if it's not, then they're kind of gone in 6 to 12 months. Um, Sorry, I think I've gone on a tangent. Can you repeat that last bit again?
Yeah, I was just basically wondering like what you think the difference is between like the small town and the big
Mhm.
town kind of like work life is like, and it's how it's kind of
Oh
like
yeah,
changed you. Sorry, it was like the question was a little meandering, but
yeah.
basically like what those differences are between like the small town and the big town and how it's changed.
Yeah, I think when you're in the small town, you feel so disconnected from kind of what we'll call the real world. And I mean, for me, it just the only way to keep in touch with that was to listen to all the podcasts and scroll through Twitter, read all the articles, and that was a way to kind of keep a pulse on everything. Whereas when you're in a major city, like whether that's New York, San Francisco, London, Paris, whatever it is, you do feel like you're part of that pulse. And um, just being surrounded by more people living that shared experience, I think, kind of creates those opportunities, like where you may you maybe wanted to become a vlogger, or start your own podcast, or maybe write an article and share your perspective, because you really feel like you're in the thick of it, like you are working on those companies, or on those um, organizations that are in the headlines every day.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have a it's a difficult one for me because I live in London, and I've looked before my current job. I was looking for work outside of London within the UK, and I
Mhm.
couldn't find what I was looking for. And then as soon as I switched my view to London, I got an opportunity very quickly.
Yeah.
And I really don't like how you are forced to work in these cities, and
Mhm.
well, not forced, but if you want to work on certain projects, you're forced to work in a certain place. And I'm wondering whether you have any thoughts about where you see yourself going once you're sort of through this current project, and whether you would like to go back to that smaller environment.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm trying to get back to anywhere that where the weather is cold. Um,
I can agree with that.
I love Canada. I love the small town kind of situation. But I think if I were to go for that again, it would probably be sticking around California. Maybe heading into the desert or something like that. Maybe Joshua Tree or Palm Springs or something.
Yes.
But then again, when I'm there for more than a few days, I start to feel like, okay, like I think I'm ready for some people again. Um,
Speaking of Joshua Tree, have you tried the little trailers that they have that you can rent out?
no, never, no.
Oh, check out the trailers. It's gonna make you like super duper excited if you're anything like me, because they have these little trailers that you can basically like rent out there, and you can have like a whole bunch of people
Yeah,
there, and it's like a tiny little town. It's super awesome.
yeah, great. That's great. It's like an Airbnb you can pick up.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Airbnb
think
trailer.
I really try not to worry too much about the future. Just kind of take it day by day. I think I'm in a good spot in my life, and really just trying to appreciate what I'm going through at the moment.
Do you think that you get a good enough opportunity to work on those hobbies of yours? Do you get to skateboard often, for example?
Yeah, I mean that's another perk of California life is we've got a little Headspace skate crew where a few of us go out. We try to go out once a week or at least once a month, um, and just the access to skate parks and the access to spots around LA. It's hard to beat.
So I don't know if you noticed this too, but one thing that I noticed a lot with people around here is almost everybody that I worked with had started a band and been in a band. They either
Yeah, yeah,
skateboarded or they've BMX'd in the past.
yeah,
They all had
yeah,
like these really similar things that I always thought was like really funny. Not in a bad way. I was just like super excited because like I'd never met people
yeah,
that were like skateboarders and BMXers. I was like the only one in my area. There's like maybe one or two friends you saw once in a while,
yeah,
but it was just like not a thing. Something that you saw in California and you're like, that's cool. I want to do that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I did both those things, skateboarded and started a band.
I knew
Um,
it. I knew it.
I started a band with a few friends. They're all kind of around the world now. One of them is lead designer at Envision doing studio. His name is
Cool.
Scott Severi,
Hmm.
and he lived just down the street from me in our little hometown.
Oh, that's
He's in
crazy.
Berlin. He's in Berlin now, but yeah, we started a band with a few other friends, and we hit the road. Just kind of like that in college, like it's something to do during the summers, and then after college a little bit. Um,
Yes.
and I think that desire to kind of get out of the small town, like that was the inspiration, and music was the vehicle.
Yep.
Um,
I wonder if that's not the
that's
thread
pretty
that
good.
ties it all together because it's like being in a band is like your ticket of getting out of your town. And there's like this whole vision of like seeing the United States and all this crazy stuff.
What was the name of the band?
The band was called Vicious Cycle, and
Vicious Cycle.
we did an album that was themed after Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot book.
Wow.
So I don't know if you're looking for aggressive hardcore music that has themes of the environment and space exploration. That's the one for you.
Vicious Cycle is the one for you.
Yeah,
Yeah, where can we find Vicious Cycle's music? That's the biggest question we've got.
the Pale Blue Dot album is on Spotify.
Oh,
Oh,
excellent name.
I don't share it a lot. I don't talk about it a lot, but it's definitely there.
Is that inspired by
we
Carl
may or may
Sagan?
not plug it.
Yeah, dude, you should plug it. I wonder maybe we'll get a few cents royalties. Just kidding.
Right, well, that's a good spot for us to round up our conversation. Thank you again for coming on. You had some really wonderful insights into personal perspective, knowing when to say no, which is really important, and kind of just being generally at one with yourself, and mainly having such a wonderful story about your marriage situation. That was really inspiring for me, at least. Thank you again.
Well, thanks very much, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, that was so much fun. All right, take care. All right. Thanks so much for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed that one. We just wanted to ask you one quick favor. We work crazy hard to bring the guests on and all the work that goes with it. We only ask you two things. The first one, if you aren't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, whatever platform you're using. We're pretty much on all the platforms. And second is to just share it with somebody you think would enjoy it. That's all. It would mean so much to us. Thanks, everybody. Peace.